He kneels in prayer, but his lips are stained with blood. Not his own, never his own. The crimson drops fall from perfect teeth on a pristine marble, each drop echoing like thunder in the cathedral silence. His wings, magnificent, pure white, untouched by corruption, spread wide behind him as he whispers words of devotion. But listen closer. Between the prayers, you'll hear something else. A growl, low, primal, hungry. This is a blood angel, the Emperor's most beautiful son, and he is dying of thirst. Not for water, not for wine, for blood, for the taste of life itself flowing warm and thick down his throat, for the sensation of flesh parting beneath his teeth like overripe fruit. If you've ever wondered how angels can fall without touching chaos, stay. This is the story of perfection as a curse. This is the tragedy of warriors too beautiful to live, too damned to die. The galaxy knows the blood angels as heroes, saviors painted in crimson and gold. But that is only the surface of a horror carved in gene and bone. What if I told you their greatest enemy isn't the alien, the heretic, or the demon? What if their greatest enemy is the very perfection that makes them magnificent? There was a moment, 10,000 years ago, when their Primarch Sanguinius could have chosen differently. A single heartbeat on the vengeful spirit. But to understand why he didn't, why he couldn't, you must understand what flows in their veins. Not just blood, memory, the echo of a dying scream that has been reverberating through their DNA since the day their father fell. The warp had always whispered to the blood angels, not in promises of power, but in promises of release. Since their first breath on the radiation-scarred world of Baal, they dreamed in crimson. Not metaphor, not madness, hunger. It came at a price. Their sanity, their peace, and eventually, their brothers. But what is the value of restraint when it wars against your very nature? The Imperium thinks of the blood angels as noble warriors who resist corruption. But that is the surface of a tragedy written in flesh and fire. What if they don't resist corruption, but something far worse? What if they resist themselves? They were the most perfect of all the legions, and therein lay their curse. They could not close their eyes to what they were becoming, even when they wanted to. Every battle fed the thirst. Every victory brought them closer to the edge. They understood secrets the flesh-tearers would murder to forget. They mapped the flow of madness like others studied tactics of war. And they knew, long before the Imperium did, that something had gone wrong in their very creation. The red thirst, their constant companion. The blood angels saw the seed of hunger before it bloomed. They watched it twist inside their souls like a serpent coiled in shadows. They screamed to be heard. But by then, the Imperium had already learned to fear what they might become. The blood angels had long been too perfect, too pure, too loud in a galaxy that demanded silence from aberrants. They called them blessed for their beauty, angels for their grace. The Codex Astartes would guide them. Their Primarch will protect them. So, when the thirst became too loud, when they saw themselves about to fall, the blood angels did the unthinkable. They embraced the hunger, not to serve chaos, not to conquer, but to survive, to endure. And in that embrace, they found something worse than damnation. They found purpose, because what they became was not just monsters. They became the death company, mankind's last hope against despair. One moment of madness, a pulse of desperate hunger, and 10,000 years of beautiful horror began. The galaxy would remember the thirst, but not the love behind it. They call them cursed. But were they? Look deeper. Listen closer. Not to what the Imperium says, but to what the blood angels became. This is the price of perfection in a cruel galaxy. This is the tale of warriors who believed that beauty could save humanity. Warriors who learned that beauty, without balance, becomes a weapon turned inward. The tale does not end here. In fact, it hasn't even begun. Because the blood angels didn't fall for power. They fell because they loved too much. And now, across the ruined tapestry of the Imperium, their name is carved in blood and tears. But some still wonder if they're watching still, waiting, not to destroy what they protect, but to become worthy of it. He stands on the walls of Terra, and for a moment, just one, the galaxy holds its breath. Not because of the armies below, not because of the ships burning overhead like falling stars, but because of him, Sanguinius, the angel, the one Primarch who never doubted, never wavered, never fell. His wings catch the light of dying suns, and even the demons pause to stare. Beautiful, that is the word they always use. Beautiful like sunrise after endless night. Beautiful like hope made flesh. But if you look closer, if you dare, you will see something else in those perfect features. Knowledge. The terrible, crushing weight of knowing exactly how this story ends. He's going to die today. He knows it, has always known it, and he is going to do it anyway. This is Sanguinius, the great angel, the bright one, the Primarch who looked into the future and saw his own death painted in crimson across the stars, and walked toward it with a smile. Because some things are worth dying for. Some things are worth becoming legends for. Some things are worth breaking your sons' hearts for 10,000 years. But to understand why his death still echoes in every blood angel's veins, you have to understand what he was before the wings, before the prophecies, before the golden light that seemed to emanate from his very skin. The Emperor crafted 20 Primarchs to be weapons. Guilliman was the administrator. Dorn was the fortifier. Russ was the executioner. But Sanguinius? Sanguinius was something the Emperor had never intended to create. He was hope made manifest. The records from the Great Crusade tell us that worlds surrendered at the mere sight of his fleet arriving in system. Not from fear, but from wonder. The angel's reputation preceded him across the galaxy like a wave of inspiration. Imperial commanders would request his presence not for his tactical genius, though it was considerable, but for what his arrival did to morale. Entire regiments would fight beyond their limits, die beyond their duty, simply because they had seen him with their own eyes. Watch the recordings from Melchior, where his intervention turned a grinding siege into a liberation in mere hours. The defenders had held for 3 years against impossible odds, their spirits broken, their faith nearly extinct. Then the angel descended from storm-racked skies, his wings spread wide, the blade in carmine singing in his hands. The defenders did not just rally, they transcended. They fought like men possessed, not by demons or madness, but by pure, crystalline purpose. His tactical approach was unlike any other Primarchus. Where Perturabo calculated angles of approach and fields of fire, Sanguinius calculated hope and despair. Where Mortarion planned for attrition and endurance, the angel planned for inspiration and transformation. His battles were not just military victories, they were spiritual resurrections. He did not conquer worlds. He reminded them what they could become. The Revenant Legion's early campaigns in the Canopus sector show this pattern emerging even before Sanguinius was found. The 9th Legion had always been different, their tactics favoring swift, precise strikes that left enemies not just defeated but awed. They were artists of war, painting their victories in crimson and gold across star systems that had never seen such terrible beauty. But they were incomplete. Magnificent, but incomplete. When the Emperor finally found his 9th son on the radiation-blasted world of Baal Secundus, the meeting was unlike any other Primarch's reunion. There were no tests of strength, no challenges of wit or will. The moment Sanguinius saw his father, he knelt, not in submission, but in recognition. Here was the being he had been created to serve, the light toward which his entire existence had been oriented since his first breath. But the Emperor, for the first and only time in the records, hesitated. He saw what his son had become in isolation. Not just a warrior, but a figure of such perfect nobility that even looking upon him was transformative. The tribal peoples of Baal worshipped Sanguinius not as a god, but as something more precious, as proof that gods could be good. They called him the angel not because he had wings, but because he had shown them that mercy and strength could coexist. The emperor had created a weapon that had evolved beyond its purpose. In Sanguinius, he saw what humanity might become if it ever learned to perfect itself. Noble beyond pride, strong beyond aggression, beautiful beyond vanity. But he also saw the danger. In a galaxy that devoured hope and corrupted purity, Sanguinius was almost too perfect to survive. The integration of the Ninth Legion with their Primarch created something unprecedented in Imperial military doctrine. The Blood Angels became more than space marines. They became living icons. Their mere presence on a battlefield served as a force multiplier that could not be quantified in standard tactical analysis. Enemy morale would crumble not from fear, but from a crushing sense of inadequacy. How do you fight perfection? How do you stand against beings that seem to have stepped from humanity's highest aspirations? Sanguinius understood this burden. The Apocrypha Sanguinius records his private conversations with his captains, moments when the perfect facade would crack just enough to reveal the weight he carried. He knew that his sons looked at him and saw not just their gene father, but their template for what they might become. Every decision he made, every word he spoke, every gesture he performed was being absorbed and replicated across an entire legion. The angel's gift of foresight manifested most clearly during the events at Murder, where his vision saved not just his own legion, but the Emperor's children and world eaters as well. While Horus lay near death from the weapon that would later claim Sanguinius himself, the angel saw glimpses of possible futures, paths where all three legions fell to alien strategies, timelines where the Great Crusade ground to a halt in that accursed system. But his greatest vision came later, during the quiet years before the storm. Sanguinius saw Horus falling to corruption, saw the civil war that would tear the Imperium apart, saw his own death on the bridge of the vengeful spirit. The other Primarchs who possessed foresight, Magnus, Kurz, were driven mad by their visions. Sanguinius was different. He saw the future and chose to embrace it, because he understood something his brothers did not. Destiny is not a chain that binds you. Destiny is a choice you make again and again in every moment that matters. And every time he looked into that terrible future, Sanguinius made the same choice. He would die to give his father the chance to win. He would break upon the anvil of fate so that humanity might survive. This was not martyrdom. This was love made into strategy. This was hope transformed into weapon. In choosing his death, Sanguinius chose life for everyone else. In accepting his fate, he defied it. They came from the shadows between stars, and their first breath tasted of copper. Not metaphor, not poetry, literal truth. The Ninth Legion drew their first lungful of recycled air in the gene laboratories of Luna, and even then, before Baal, before Sanguinius, before the curse had a name, there was something wrong with their blood. The tech priests called it a minor genetic deviation. The Emperor called it acceptable variance. The Legion called it hunger. But this is not the story you think you know. This is not about noble warriors falling to darkness. This is about darkness that was there from the very beginning, waiting, watching, growing stronger with every victory, every campaign, every drop of blood spilled in the Emperor's name. They were the Revenant Legion then. The name should have been a warning. Revenants do not live. They endure. They persist beyond death, driven by purposes that transcend mortal understanding. And from their very first deployment in the Unification Wars, the Ninth Legion showed a disturbing tendency to do exactly that, to keep fighting long after any reasonable force would have withdrawn, to press attacks beyond the point of tactical sense, to drink deep from the well of violence until it changed them. Watch the battle records from the Caucasus wastes. where a single company of the 9th held a strategic pass for 72 hours against impossible odds. Not because they were ordered to, not because retreat was impossible, but because something in their gene seed whispered that blood spilled here would taste sweeter than victory claimed elsewhere. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the 9th Legion warriors standing among mountains of corpses, their armor painted in gore, their eyes bright with insatisfaction that had nothing to do with duty accomplished. The other legions noticed. How could they not? Where the 3rd Legion sought perfection and the 7th sought endurance, the 9th Legion sought something altogether more primal. They fought not just to win, but to revel in the winning. They did not simply eliminate enemies. They transformed battlefields into art galleries of violence, each death arranged with an aesthetic sensibility that spoke to something deeper than mere military efficiency. Their tactics reflected this fundamental difference. While other legions developed doctrines around suppression, flanking maneuvers, and strategic withdrawal, the 9th Legion specialized in what Imperial Army commanders began calling crimson assaults. Swift, beautiful, utterly devastating attacks that left no survivors, but also left no doubt about who had been responsible. They signed their victories in blood, literally painting their heraldry on conquered walls with the life essence of their enemies. But here's what the histories do not tell you. What they cannot tell you because it reveals too much about what the Emperor was truly creating in his laboratories. The 9th Legion did not develop these tendencies despite their genetic purity. They developed them because of it. Every Space Marine Legion carried flaws in their gene seed. That was the price of rapid enhancement, of trying to elevate humanity beyond its natural limits. Most legions carried flaws that weakened them, made them more susceptible to mutation, or reduced their combat effectiveness, or limited their operational lifespan. The 9th Legion carried a flaw that made them stronger, and that terrified everyone who understood what it meant. The flaw was elegant in its simplicity. The 9th Legion absorbed genetic material from their enemies. Not consciously, not deliberately, but every time they spilled blood, every time they breathed in the copper-scented mist of a battlefield, every time they fought close enough to taste their opponent's fear, they took something. A fragment of genetic code here, a twist of DNA there. Nothing major, nothing that changed their fundamental nature, but it accumulated. Battle by battle, campaign by campaign, the 9th Legion became something more than what the Emperor had created. They became apex predators, refined by constant exposure to the genetic diversity of the galaxy's most dangerous life forms. Their reflexes sharpened beyond human possibility. Their senses expanded to perceive threats in spectrums of experience that baseline humans could not even imagine. And their hunger grew. The gene laboratories on Luna recorded the changes but could not explain them. Blood samples taken from newly inducted recruits showed standard Astartes markers. Blood samples taken from veterans of multiple campaigns showed additions that should not have been possible. Genetic sequences that had no business existing in human DNA. Proteins that enhanced aggression, accelerated healing, and most disturbing of all, proteins that triggered euphoric responses to the consumption of fresh blood. The Emperor knew. Of course he knew. The master of gene craft could hardly miss such obvious mutations in his own creations. But he said nothing, did nothing, because the 9th Legion was becoming exactly what he needed them to become. Not just warriors, but weapons that grew sharper with each battle. Other legions conquered worlds. The 9th Legion devoured them. They absorbed the fighting techniques of every enemy they faced, incorporated the strengths of every opponent they defeated, and transformed those advantages into assets for the Great Crusade. They were evolution in power armor, adaptation given bolter and blade. But evolution is not a gentle process. It demands sacrifice. It demands change. And it demands that you become something other than what you were. The Revenant Legion began to show behavioral modifications that disturbed even their own command structure. They would spend hours after battles in what they called meditation, but which field observers noted looked remarkably like feeding rituals. They developed an obsession with collecting trophies, not weapons or banners, but biological samples. Vials of enemy blood, fragments of alien bone, genetic material that they claimed to study, but which disappeared into their personal effects with troubling regularity. Their combat doctrines evolved beyond Imperial standard tactical frameworks. They developed new methods of close-quarters combat that emphasized not just killing, but extracting maximum biological data from their opponents before death. They learned to read genetic markers through taste, to identify threats through scent, to track enemies across star systems by following genetic trails invisible to augur arrays. And all the while, the hunger grew stronger. Not just for battle, not just for victory, but for the essence of life itself. For the moment when enemy blood touched their tongues and they could taste the story written in crimson, the fears, the strengths, the secrets that could only be unlocked through consumption. They were becoming something unprecedented in Imperial military history. Not just enhanced humans, but conscious evolutionary accelerators. Living weapons that improve themselves by devouring their enemies. Beautiful predators that refine their techniques by absorbing the best aspects of everything they killed. The other legions called them the Ninth Legion. The Imperial Army called them the Revenants. But in the darkest corners of the gene laboratories on Luna, the tech priests who monitored their development had another name for them. They called them the Future. The Desert Screams. Not with wind, though the radioactive storms of Baal Secundus howl like the voices of the damned. Not with heat, though the twin suns burn flesh from bone in minutes. The desert screams with memory, with the echo of a 10,000-year-old war that never truly ended, fought by tribes who learned to drink poison and call it water, to eat ash and call it bread. And in the heart of this screaming wasteland, something impossible lives. Something that should not exist in a universe governed by entropy and decay. Something beautiful. He stands atop the highest spire of the fortress they call the Angel's Keep, wings spread against the amber sky, and even the radiation fears to touch him. The tribal warriors below, scarred, twisted, barely human after generations of survival in this hell, look up at him and remember what they used to be, what they could become again. This is the moment that changes everything, not just for the Blood Angels, not just for the Ninth Legion, but for the entire trajectory of human evolution in a galaxy that has forgotten how to hope. The Emperor's ship descends through atmosphere thick with fallout, its hull gleaming like a star against the poisoned sky. For the first time since Ulanor, since Horus was named War Master, the Emperor himself has come to claim one of his sons. Not because Sanguinius is difficult to find. The angel's presence blazes like a beacon to psychic senses. Not because the world is strategically vital. Baal Secundus is a wasteland that produces nothing but suffering. The Emperor has come because something in the warp whispers that this reunion will matter more than all the others. That what happens here, in this moment, will echo through the millennia to come. The tribal armies of Baal gather to witness their angel meet his father. But these are not the same broken remnants that clung to life when Sanguinius first fell from the sky decades ago. Under his guidance, they have become something magnificent. The Pure, as they call themselves now, stand in perfect formation despite having no formal military training. Their weapons are crude by Imperial standards, but their discipline would make veteran guard regiments weep with envy. And every single one of them would die for the angel without hesitation. Not because he commands them, because he saved them. Not from the radiation, not from the tribal wars, not from the harsh realities of their poisoned world. He saved them from despair, from the slow poison of believing that survival was the highest aspiration intelligent beings could achieve. Watch the Emperor as he steps from his transport, his golden form untouched by the radioactive winds. For the first time in recorded history, he hesitates, not from uncertainty. The master of mankind knows exactly who and what Sanguinius is, but from something approaching wonder. In 38,000 years of existence, he has never seen one of his Primarchs inspire such genuine, unforced devotion. The tribal warriors do not kneel because they fear the Emperor. They kneel because their angel knelt first, and they trust his judgment absolutely. This is not the compliance born of conquest that marks every other imperial world. This is something rarer, more precious, and infinitely more dangerous. This is love made manifest in the form of perfect loyalty. Sanguinius speaks first, not the formal words of a son acknowledging his father, not the ritual phrases that other Primarchs had used in their moments of reunion. He speaks the words that will define the Blood Angels for 10 millennia to come. Father, I have been waiting for you to come home. Home! As if this radiation-blasted wasteland were not a hell, but a haven. As if the Emperor had not been conquering the galaxy, but searching for something he had lost. As if the Great Crusade were not expansion, but return. The Emperor's response is not recorded in any official imperial history. But the tribal shamans who witnessed the reunion passed down the story through generations of oral tradition, and their descendants still whisper it in the deep places of Baal. The Emperor, the immortal tyrant who has never shown weakness, never displayed doubt, never acknowledged error, wept, not from sorrow, not from joy, but from the crushing realization that in creating Sanguinius, he had accidentally achieved something he had long believed impossible. He had created a being more perfect than himself. The integration of the Ninth Legion with their Primarch begins immediately, but it is unlike any other such reunion in Imperial history. Where other legions required months or years to adapt to their Gene Father's presence, the Blood Angels and Sanguinius meld together like parts of a whole that had temporarily been separated. The legions accumulated hunger, their predatory instincts, their evolutionary adaptations. All of it finds perfect expression in their Primarch's presence. But Sanguinius brings something else to the Legion, something they had been lacking despite all their biological advantages, all their tactical innovations, all their accumulated genetic diversity. He brings them restraint, not the restraint of weakness or fear, but the restraint of choice. The knowledge that power without wisdom is merely destruction wearing a prettier mask. He teaches them that being apex predators does not mean becoming mindless beasts. That evolution is not just about adaptation, but about transcendence. That the hunger they feel, the endless, growing, demanding hunger for blood and battle, and the essence of life itself, is not a flaw to be cured but a gift to be controlled. Under his guidance, the Blood Angels develop the rituals that will define their culture for millennia. The Blood Chalice ceremonies, where warriors share their own life essence to strengthen their bonds. The rites of preservation, where the genetic material of worthy enemies is consumed not from savage hunger, but from respectful acknowledgement of their strength. The meditations of the Red Hour, where battle brothers explore the boundaries of their hunger in controlled, spiritual contexts. Most important of all, Sanguinius gives them the gift of sacrifice, the understanding that their enhanced abilities, their genetic advantages, their evolutionary superiority, all of it means nothing if it is not placed in service of something greater than themselves. He teaches them to see their hunger not as a weakness to be ashamed of, but as a sacred trust to be honored. The Emperor watches this transformation with growing unease. He had intended the Primarchs to be weapons, sophisticated, adaptable, but ultimately tools to be wielded in service of his vision for humanity. But Sanguinius is becoming something else entirely. He is becoming a teacher, a spiritual guide, a living example of what humanity might evolve into if it could learn to master its darker impulses rather than simply suppressing them. And the Blood Angels are becoming his students, learning not just how to fight, but why fighting matters. Not just how to kill, but how to preserve life through the application of control violence. Not just how to conquer, but how to inspire conquered peoples to become willing participants in their own elevation. This is the gift and the curse that Sanguinius brings to his legion. The gift of understanding their nature completely, without shame or fear. The curse of knowing that such understanding comes with responsibility that will test them beyond all limits. The gift of becoming more than human. The curse of remaining human enough to suffer for it. The reunion on Baal changes everything. Not just for father and son, not just for Legion and Primarch. It creates something entirely new in the galaxy. A military force guided not by conquest, but by love. Powered not by hatred, but by hope. United not by fear, but by absolute, unwavering trust in their angel's vision of what they could become. And in the deep places of the warp, something ancient and hungry takes notice. Something that understands that love, properly corrupted, makes the sweetest poison of all. The victory feast should be celebration, should be triumph painted in gold and crimson across the marble halls of a conquered palace. Should be the moment when heroes rest and reflect on duty accomplished, enemies defeated, worlds brought into compliance. Should be. But watch closely. Watch the blood angel seated at the high table, his perfect features unmarred by battle, his armor polished to mirror brightness. Watch how his eyes track not the ceremonial wine being poured, but the servant pouring it. Watch how his nostrils flare slightly when the mortal steps closer. How his pupils dilate when he catches the scent of pulse and breath and life flowing warm beneath fragile skin. Watch how his hand trembles, just slightly, barely perceptibly, as he reaches for his goblet. Not from fatigue, not from injury, from restraint, from the monumental effort it takes to not grab the servant by the throat and tear it open with his teeth. This is the red thirst, and it is not a metaphor. They call a flaw, a genetic deviation, a quirk in the gene seed that sometimes surfaces in certain battle brothers under specific conditions. But those are the words they use in official reports, in sanitized medical summaries filed with the apothecarium, and forgotten in data vaults where uncomfortable truths go to die. The reality is simpler, more terrible, and infinitely more intimate. The red thirst is hunger, pure, primal, overwhelming hunger for the taste of fresh blood flowing warm from a living throat. Not because it provides sustenance. A Space Marine's enhanced physiology can extract nutrition from substances that would kill baseline humans. Not because it offers tactical advantages, though the genetic information absorbed through consumption does provide certain benefits. But because it feels good, because it feels right, because it feels like coming home to a place you never knew you were searching for. The first recorded incident appears in the Legion archives from the compliance of Gehenna Prime, 47 years after reunion with their Primarch. A Blood Angel sergeant named Erastos had led his squad through 18 hours of continuous combat against Gene Stealer cultists. Textbook operation. Perfect execution. 0 casualties. When the last alien hybrid fell, Erastos knelt beside its corpse and did something that would haunt his brothers for centuries to come. He fed, not delicately, not ritually, not with the controlled precision that would later characterize Blood Angel feeding ceremonies. He tore into the creature's throat like a wild animal, drinking deep of ichor that should have been poison, making sounds that had no place in a human throat. His squad watched in horrified fascination as their sergeant, a warrior they had followed through a dozen campaigns, a leader they trusted with their lives, transformed into something that was no longer entirely human. When he finally raised his head, his face was painted in alien blood, his eyes bright with an ecstasy that transcended any pleasure known to mortal experience. And he was smiling, not the grim satisfaction of duty accomplished, but the blissful contentment of hunger finally, completely, perfectly satisfied. The incident was classified, Erastos was transferred to a specialist unit for additional training. The official records listed him as killed in action 3 months later. But the memory spread through the Legion like a virus, whispered in the darkness between brothers who had begun to notice their own symptoms manifesting. Because Erastos was not unique, he was not even unusual. He was simply the first to stop fighting it. The red thirst manifests differently in different warriors, but the pattern is always the same. It begins in the quiet moments after battle, when adrenaline fades and the mind seeks new stimulation. A blood angel will find his attention drawn to the wounded, the dying, the freshly dead. At first, it seems like medical concern, the natural impulse of a warrior trained in field surgery, checking on casualties. But the attention lingers, focuses, becomes something altogether more disturbing. They begin to notice details that have nothing to do with tactical assessment. The way blood pools and wounds, the color variations that indicate different levels of oxygenation, the subtle changes in scent that mark the transition from life to death. They find themselves moving closer to casualties, ostensibly to provide aid, but actually to better appreciate the aesthetic qualities of trauma and bleeding. The progression is insidious. A battle brother might spend minutes kneeling beside a wounded enemy, ostensibly administering the Emperor's mercy, but actually studying the patterns of blood flow with the intensity of an artist contemplating a masterpiece. He might volunteer for casualty collection duties, claiming his penance, but actually seeking opportunities to be alone with the wounded and dying. Then comes the moment of revelation, usually triggered by stress, by exhaustion, by the chemical aftermath of particularly intense combat. A blood angel will find himself alone with a casualty, enemy or ally. It makes no difference in that moment, and the hunger will surge beyond his ability to control it. He will lean closer, ostensibly to check for signs of life. His enhanced senses will detect the chemical signatures of approaching death, the metabolic changes that mark the transition from living to lifeless. And he will taste, just a drop at first, a finger touched to a wound and brought to the lips as if by accident. The flavor explodes across enhanced taste receptors like the most exquisite delicacy, triggering neural pathways that should not exist in human physiology. The pleasure is immediate, overwhelming, and absolutely addictive. For the first time in his enhanced existence, the Space Marine feels complete. The genetic material absorbed through blood consumption provides remarkable benefits: enhanced regeneration rates, improved reflexes, temporary boosts to sensory acuity. But these advantages pale beside the psychological effects. The red thirst does not just satisfy hunger. It provides perfect clarity. In the moment of feeding, all doubts fade, all fears dissolve, all questions find answers. The universe reveals itself as a place of perfect order where predator and prey dance their eternal ballet, where strength and beauty combine in the simple act of consumption. This clarity becomes another form of addiction. Blood angels who have tasted the red thirst find normal consciousness increasingly inadequate. Colors seem muted, sounds become flat, experiences lose their intensity. They begin to crave not just the physical act of feeding, but the mental state it produces. The perfect, crystalline awareness that comes only when drinking life itself. The Legion's response to these incidents reveals the true horror of their situation. They do not treat the red thirst as disease or corruption requiring cure. They treat it as an inevitable aspect of their nature requiring management. Special protocols are developed for battle brothers showing symptoms. Feeding rituals are formalized to channel the hunger into controlled expressions. Medical personnel are trained to recognize the signs and provide appropriate interventions. Most tellingly, they establish the Crimson Chalice ceremonies, formal occasions where the entire chapter can safely indulge their hunger through the consumption of specially prepared blood offerings. These are not desperate attempts to satisfy addiction. but sophisticated cultural institutions designed to integrate an inhuman appetite into the fabric of Space Marine Brotherhood. Because the truth that no official report will ever acknowledge is this: the red thirst makes them better warriors. Blood angels who have learned to channel their hunger fight with an intensity and precision that unafflicted Space Marines cannot match. They read battlefields through senses enhanced by genetic consumption, anticipate enemy movements through instincts refined by predatory awareness, strike with killing efficiency learned from countless intimate encounters with death itself. The red thirst is not a flaw in the Blood Angel's gene seed. It is evolution in action, adaptation to the reality of a galaxy where survival demands becoming something more than human. It is the price and the prize of transcendence. The knowledge that perfection always comes with hunger, and that hunger, properly channeled, can become the greatest strength of all. The screaming starts at dawn, not the clean sound of battle fury or righteous anger, but something broken, primal, torn from the depths of a mind that has forgotten the difference between past and present, between memory and reality, between self and Primarch. Brother Castile stands in his cell, beating fists bloody against reinforced ceramite, and he is no longer Brother Castile. He is Sanguinius. He is dying. He is watching Horus raise bloodied talons for the killing blow, and he's been dying this death for 3 days straight. Horus. The name tears from his throat like a curse, like a prayer, like the last words of a man who knows his fate but charges toward it anyway. I will not let you reach Terra. I will not let you touch our father. But Horus is not here. Horus died 10,000 years ago on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, along with the Emperor's mercy and the Primarch whose death still echoes in the gene seed of every blood angel who draws breath. What stands here is Brother Castile of the 3rd Company, 5th Squad, a warrior of 3 centuries who earned his red helm on the killing fields of Armageddon and has never known defeat. Until now. Until the Black Rage took him in the middle of victory celebrations, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, transforming him from a guardian of humanity into its greatest threat. This is the Black Rage, and it is worse than death because death, at least, ends. The apothecaries call it traumatic genetic memory. The chaplains call it a curse inherited through blood. The affected simply call it hell. But these are words meant to make the incomprehensible seem manageable, to reduce cosmic horror to medical terminology that can be filed in reports and forgotten. The reality defies such simple categorization. The Black Rage is not madness. Madness implies disconnection from reality, a retreat into fantasy or delusion. The Black Rage is the opposite, a connection to reality so complete, so overwhelming, that it shatters the barriers between individual consciousness and genetic memory. Those who fall to it do not lose their minds. They inherit another mind entirely. They become Sanguinius, not metaphorically, but literally, experiencing his final moments with such vivid intensity that their own identity dissolves like salt in water. Watch the progression. It always begins the same way, usually in moments of stress or intense emotion. A blood angel will pause mid-conversation, his eyes focusing on something only he can see. The first signs are subtle: a slight change in posture, a different cadence to breathing, pupils dilating despite stable lighting conditions. These symptoms might last seconds or hours, but they always escalate. The affected warrior begins responding to stimuli that exist only in genetic memory. He ducks attacks that ended 10 millennia ago, shouts warnings to brothers who died before the Imperium learned to count years in the 41st millennium. His enhanced senses perceive the vengeful spirit's corridors superimposed over whatever environment he actually occupies. The smell of burning plasma and venting atmosphere fills his nostrils. The sound of dying ships and screaming void fills his ears. Most terrifying of all, He begins to remember things no living being should know. Conversations between Sanguinius and Horus before the corruption took hold. The weight of seeing the future through a Primarch's eyes. The crushing certainty that this death is necessary. That someone perfect must die imperfectly so that something greater might survive. The affected warrior experiences not just the physical sensations of being a Primarch, but the emotional and psychological reality of bearing responsibility for the fate of entire species. Brother Castiel's case is typical. 3 days ago, he stood victorious on the battlefield of Mordian 7, having led the final assault that broke a chaos cult's stranglehold on the planet's primary hive. The victory celebration was proceeding normally. Ritual cleansing of weapons, recitation of battle honors, the formal acknowledgement of courage displayed and sacrifices made. Castiel was accepting congratulations from his squad brothers when something in his expression changed. "The ships," he said quietly. "They're breaking through the outer defenses." His battle brothers looked confused. There were no ships. The naval engagement had ended 6 hours earlier with the complete destruction of the cultist fleet. But Castiel was not seeing the celebration chamber of an Imperial Guard facility. He was seeing the bridge of the Red Tier, Sanguinius's flagship, as reports flooded in about Horus's approach to Terra. He was feeling the weight of a Primarch's wings, the terrible knowledge that this would be his last flight, the crushing love for sons who would inherit his pain. The transformation accelerated. Within minutes, Castiel was speaking in high Gothic dialects that had been extinct for millennia, using tactical terminology from the Great Crusade, referencing battle formations that predated the Codex Astartes. His squad brothers recognized the signs immediately. They had seen this before, would see it again, carried the genetic predisposition for it in their own blood. The Black Rage does not simply replay Sanguinius's final battle. It replays his entire emotional state during those final hours. The crushing burden of foresight, the knowledge that his death was necessary but would break his sons' hearts. The terrible love for Horus that persisted even as his brother fell to corruption. The desperate hope that his sacrifice would buy the Emperor enough time to reach the vengeful spirit and end the heresy. Most horrifying of all, it replays his awareness of what this death would do to his legion. Sanguinius knew that his demise would create a psychic wound in the gene seed of every blood angel yet to be born. He saw the Black Rage itself in his final visions, watched his sons falling to the same madness that would claim them 10,000 years later. He died knowing that his death would be a gift that kept on giving, a trauma that would echo through the centuries like a bell that never stops ringing. This knowledge becomes part of the experience for those fallen to the Black Rage. They do not just experience Sanguinius's death. They experience his foreknowledge of what that death would cost. They feel his grief for sons not yet born who would inherit his final moments as their burden. They understand, with perfect clarity, that their current suffering was foreseen and accepted by their Primarch as a necessary price for humanity's survival. The affected warriors retain this terrible awareness, even as their capacity for individual thought dissolves. They know they are not really Sanguinius, but they also know they are not really themselves anymore. They exist in a liminal space between identity and inheritance, simultaneously experiencing their own dissolution and their Primarch's ascension to mythology. This is why the Black Rage is worse than simple madness. Madness offers the mercy of disconnection, the blessing of not understanding what has been lost. The Black Rage offers only clarity, the perfect, terrible clarity of watching yourself disappear while becoming someone else's echo, of feeling your own personality being overwritten by genetic memory, while remaining conscious enough to understand exactly what is happening. The Blood Angels have learned to see this not as tragedy, but as honor. Warriors claimed by the Black Rage are inducted into the Death Company, painted in black armor, and given the chance to die as Sanguinius died, in service to something greater than themselves. They charge into hopeless battles, seeking the death that Sanguinius chose, carrying his sacrifice forward into new conflicts against new enemies. But the deeper horror remains unspoken. Each warrior who falls to the Black Rage adds his own death to the genetic memory, creating new echoes of trauma that future generations will inherit. The curse is not static. It grows stronger with each passing century, each new death, each moment of grief added to the collective unconscious of the Blood Angels. They are not just inheriting their Primarch's death. They are inheriting the deaths of all their brothers who fell to the Black Rage before them, creating a cascading symphony of sacrifice that grows more complex and overwhelming with each passing generation. This is the true horror of the Black Rage. It is not simply a curse that claims individuals. It is a growing burden that the entire chapter carries forward through time, a genetic memory that becomes heavier with each brother lost, each death witnessed, each moment of madness experienced by warriors who once stood as humanity's guardians. He knows, standing in the teleportarium of the Red Tier, surrounded by his sons preparing for what they believe might be victory, Sanguinius knows exactly how this ends. The visions have been coming for weeks now, fragments of the future bleeding through the present like wounds that will not heal. He has seen the bridge of the vengeful spirit. He has seen Horus, beautiful and damned, wearing corruption like a crown. He has seen his own death painted in crimson across the stars. And he has seen what comes after. The price his sons will pay, the curse that will claim them, the 10,000 years of darkness that his death will birth. But he steps into the teleporter anyway. This is the moment that breaks the galaxy. Not the Emperor's confrontation with Horus. That was always inevitable, written in the fundamental nature of father and son, creator and created. This is different. This is the moment when love becomes sacrifice, when foresight becomes acceptance, when the most perfect of the Primarchs chooses to die not for glory or duty, but for something infinitely more precious, for hope. The Siege of Terra has raged for 55 days. The palace walls lie in ruins. The Eternity Gate stands breached. Demons walk the sacred halls where the Emperor once held court, and reality itself bleeds from wounds that may never heal. Horus stands triumphant aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, and for one terrible moment, victory seems within his grasp. Then the shields fail. A single moment of technological malfunction, or perhaps something more, perhaps the last gift of a mechanicum that remembers what loyalty means, and suddenly the path to Horus lies open. The Emperor, Sanguinius, and Rogel Dorn translate aboard the enemy flagship, carrying with them the last hope of an Imperium on the brink of destruction. But Sanguinius arrives first, alone, and he knows why. The corridors of the Vengeful Spirit have been transformed into something that exists at the intersection of reality and nightmare. Demonic flesh grows from the walls like cancer. The air itself screams with voices that speak in languages that predate human consciousness. This is not simply a ship anymore. It is a wound in the universe, a place where the immaterium bleeds through into reality and transforms everything it touches. Sanguinius walks these corridors like a man approaching his own grave, his wings folded tight against his back, the blade in carmine singing softly in his hand. He could wait for his father, should wait. The tactical advantages of coordinated assault are obvious to any warrior trained in the arts of war. But tactics are for those who fight to win. Sanguinius fights for something different now. He fights to break his brother's heart, because that is what this is really about. Not victory or defeat, not the fate of the Imperium or the survival of humanity. This is about love, about the bond between two beings who were created to be perfect, who found perfection in each other, who now stand on opposite sides of a war that will define the next 10 millennia. Horus has fallen to chaos not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to bear corruption and remain himself. He has become something terrible and magnificent, a fusion of human ambition and demonic power that makes him nearly unstoppable. Nearly, but not quite, because Horus still loves Sanguinius. Even corrupted, even transformed, even wearing the gifts of the dark gods like armor, some part of him remembers what they were to each other before the galaxy burned. Some part of him still sees his brother and feels the echo of what they once shared. Not just brotherhood, but understanding. The recognition that they were more alike than different, that they were twin aspects of the same fundamental truth. And Sanguinius knows that this love is Horus's only remaining weakness. The throne room of the vengeful spirit has been rebuilt as a temple to ascension, its walls adorned with the symbols of all four chaos gods in perfect, blasphemous harmony. At its center sits Horus, no longer entirely human, but not yet entirely demon, beautiful and terrible in ways that make reality weep to look upon him. Power radiates from his form like heat from a forge, warping the air around him into patterns that speak of futures too dark to contemplate. When Sanguinius enters, Horus smiles, not the predatory grin of a conqueror facing his final obstacle, but something genuinely joyful, something that remembers what joy used to mean. "Brother," he says, and his voice carries harmonics that exist in dimensions humanity has no names for. "I have been waiting for you." They do not speak of the war. They do not discuss terms of surrender or conditions for mercy. Instead, they talk as they used to during the Great Crusade, when the galaxy was young and the future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten poem. They speak of worlds they conquered together, of victories shared and sorrows divided. They remember what it was like to fight side by side, to trust absolutely, to know that no matter what the universe threw at them, they would face it together. And as they speak, Sanguinius understands the true magnitude of what chaos has taken from them. Not just loyalty or sanity or the bonds of brotherhood, but time. The simple gift of growing old together, of watching their father's dream come to fruition, of seeing what humanity might become if given the chance to evolve beyond its limitations. Horus extends his hand, not in threat, but in invitation. "Join me, brother. We can still have it all. We can still rule the galaxy as we were meant to, not as the Emperor's servants, but as gods in our own right." And for one moment, one terrible, perfect moment, Sanguinius considers it, because the alternative is death. Not just his own death, but the death of hope itself. The future he has seen, the curse that will claim his sons, the 10,000 years of darkness that his refusal will birth. But then he remembers something else, something the visions have shown him that Horus cannot see. He remembers the blood-soaked halls of Baal, where his sons will gather in the darkness to remember what it means to be human. He remembers the battles yet to come, where warriors wearing his colors will stand against impossible odds, not for glory or conquest, but for the simple right of humanity to exist. He remembers that love is not about preserving what you cherish. Sometimes love is about letting what you cherish destroy you, so that something greater can be born from the ashes. "No, brother," he says, and spreads his wings one final time. "I cannot. The battle that follows is not a duel between equals. It is an execution disguised as combat, a dance of death choreographed by fate itself and performed by the two most perfect warriors ever created." Sanguinius fights with skill that transcends mortal understanding, but he fights without hope. Every blow he strikes, every wound he inflicts, every moment of advantage he gains, all of it is designed not to win, but to make Horus remember what he has lost. And it works. With each exchange, with each drop of blood spilled, Horus becomes more himself, and less the creature chaos has made him. The corruption begins to crack, revealing glimpses of the brother Sanguinius once knew. For brief moments, the old Horus breaks through, the war master who led the Great Crusade, the son who loved his father, the brother who would have died to protect what they built together. But those moments make him dangerous in ways that pure corruption never could. When Horus remembers what he was, he also remembers what he has become, and the rage that follows, the fury of a soul that has seen its own damnation and found it unacceptable, is terrible beyond description. The killing blow comes not from malice, but from grief. Horus sees his brother dying by his hand, and for one perfect instant, he is himself again. He reaches out, trying to heal the wounds he has inflicted, trying to undo what cannot be undone. But the power that flows through him is no longer his to control, and love, transformed by chaos, becomes the cruelest weapon of all. Sanguinius dies knowing that his death will break something in Horus that even the gods of chaos cannot repair. Dies knowing that this moment of genuine grief will give his father the opening he needs to reach the throne room. Dies knowing that his sacrifice will save humanity not through victory, but through the love that remains even in the heart of the damned. And in dying, he gives his sons something more precious than life. He gives them a purpose that will endure for 10,000 years, not to avenge his death, but to honor it. To remember that even angels can choose how their story ends, and that sometimes the greatest victory is found not in surviving, but in choosing what you die for. His last thought is not for himself, but for the blood angels who will inherit his death as their burden. He sees them struggling with the curse his sacrifice will create, and he forgives them in advance for every moment of weakness, every lapse in a madness, every drop of blood they will spill in his name, because he understands what they will learn too late. Love is not a weakness to be overcome. Love is the strength to choose sacrifice over survival, hope over despair, meaning over mere existence. Love is the gift that keeps on giving, even when giving it kills you. The funeral pyre burns on Baal for 7 days and 7 nights, but Sanguinius will never truly die. His ashes scatter on radioactive winds, but his death takes root in the gene seed of every blood angel who draws breath. What the Legion does not yet understand, what they cannot understand until the first of their brothers begins screaming in the night, is that grief, when written into DNA itself, becomes inheritance. The first signs appear within weeks of Terra's liberation. Brother Malachar of the 5th Company collapses during evening prayers, his enhanced physiology overwhelmed by visions that are not his own. He sees the bridge of the vengeful spirit, feels wings that are not as being broken by claws of terrible power, dies a death that ended months ago but will never truly end. When he awakens, Malachar is no longer entirely himself. Something else looks out through his eyes. Not Sanguinius, not exactly, but the echo of his final moments burned into genetic memory like a brand. The Legion's apothecaries examine him with growing horror as they realize what they are seeing. The Primarch's death has been encoded into their very essence, transforming trauma into heredity. This is how curses truly spread, not through infection or corruption, but through love so deep it transcends the boundaries between individual consciousness and collective identity. The Blood Angels did not simply lose their father. They absorbed his death into their very being, making his final moments their burden to carry across the centuries. But they are not alone in this inheritance. The successor chapters that would eventually be born from their gene seed carry the same genetic legacy, the same capacity for transcendent suffering. The flesh-tearers, angels in Carmen, angels sanguine, each carries a fragment of Sanguinius's death in their blood, manifesting in ways that speak to their individual nature while maintaining the core truth of their shared curse. Watch the flesh-tearers as they embrace what their parent Legion tries to control. where the blood angels seek to channel their hunger through ritual and ceremony. The flesh-tearers allow it to flow freely. Their red thirst burns hotter, manifests earlier, transforms them into weapons that even other space marines regard with unease. They paint their armor in fresh blood, not as symbol, but as sacrament, marking each battle with the crimson evidence of their nature. Their chapter master, Gabriel Seth, understands what others refuse to acknowledge. The curses are not flaws to be cured, but fundamental aspects of what they are. Fighting them is like fighting the need to breathe, possible for a time, but ultimately futile. Better to accept the darkness and learn to dance with it than to pretend it does not exist. The angels in Carmen take a different path, transforming their curse into art. Their halls ring with music composed to honor the dead. Their warriors create sculptures from the bones of worthy enemies. Their battle hymns tell stories of beautiful death that inspire even as they disturb. They have learned to make their suffering serve beauty, to transform genetic trauma into cultural expression that speaks to truths too deep for words. But perhaps no successor chapter bears the burden more visibly than the Lamenters. Their gene seed carries not just the standard curses of their lineage, but an additional weight that seems to attract misfortune like a lodestone draws iron. They fight valiantly, serve loyally, sacrifice everything for the Imperium's protection, and yet disaster follows them like a faithful hound. Their history reads like a catalog of tragic irony, victories that become defeats through circumstances beyond their control, allies who betray them at crucial moments, battles won at costs so high that victory tastes like ashes. The Badab War nearly destroyed them entirely, transforming loyal servants of the Emperor into excommunicate traitors through politics and pride and the simple cruel mathematics of being in the wrong place when history turned dark. Yet they endure. They continue to fight, continue to hope, continue to believe that their next battle might be the one where the curse finally breaks. Their yellow armor bears a bleeding heart as its symbol, not a sign of weakness, but an acknowledgement that hearts which bleed can still beat, can still love, can still choose hope, even when hope seems foolish. This is the true legacy of Sanguinius's death, not just the genetic curses that claim individual warriors, but the spiritual inheritance that defines entire chapters. Each successor carries a piece of their Primarch's final moments, but also a piece of his choice to die for something greater than himself. They inherit not just trauma, but purpose, not just suffering, but meaning. The red thirst teaches them that hunger can be transformed as strength. The black rage shows them that madness can serve sacred purposes. The accumulated weight of 10,000 years of genetic memory proves that some burdens are worth carrying because they connect you to something larger than individual existence. This is why the Blood Angels and their successors do not seek to cure their curses. They understand what others cannot, that their flaws are also their gifts, their weaknesses also their greatest strengths. They carry the death of an angel in their blood, but they also carry his love, his sacrifice, his unwavering commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The curse is spread because love spreads, because grief shared becomes grief transformed, because sometimes the most powerful gifts come wrapped in the form of burdens too heavy for any one person to bear alone. And across the galaxy, wherever the sons of Sanguinius gather to remember their fallen father, they understand a truth that lesser warriors never learn. That inheritance is not about what you receive, but what you do with what you have been given. That curses, properly understood, can become blessings in disguise. They wake in cages, not restraints designed for prisoners or cells meant for punishment, but sanctified chambers where warriors who have already died once wait to die again. The death company kneels in darkness, their black armor unmarked by heraldry save for the crimson crosses that mark them as the walking dead. They whisper prayers in voices that are no longer entirely their own, speaking words their Primarch spoke 10 millennia ago on the bridge of a ship that no longer exists. Brother Thane died on Cretaceous 3 months ago. Not his body, that still breathes, still moves, still fights with skill that would humble veteran warriors, but his mind, his identity, everything that made him Thane of the Third Company perished the moment the Black Rage claimed him. What remains is something more and less than human, a living echo of Sanguinius's final moments wearing familiar flesh. He believes he is flying toward the vengeful spirit, believes he carries the weight of the Imperium's hope on wings that spread wide against stars that died before he was born. When his captors release him, he will charge toward enemies he sees as Horus, screaming warnings about betrayals that already happened, fighting battles that ended when the galaxy was young. This is the Death Company's truth. They are warriors who have died the death of their Primarch, and now exist in the eternal moment of his sacrifice. Time holds no meaning for them. Past and present blur together like watercolors in rain. They experience Sanguinius's final hours not as memory, but as immediate reality, trapped in a loop of heroic death that plays endlessly in their shattered consciousness. Chaplain Astarath watches them through reinforced glass, his skull helm reflecting their restless movements. The Redeemer of the Lost carries executioner's duty for those who fall too completely into madness, but he also carries hope. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, warriors return from the Black Rage. The process strips away everything they were, but occasionally reveals something new beneath. Something purified by suffering, refined by experiencing death, and choosing to embrace it. The Death Company's armor tells stories painted in crimson and black. Each warrior bears the heraldry of his original company, combined with symbols of death and remembrance. They are walking memorials, living monuments to sacrifice that transforms individual death into collective purpose. Their weapons have been blessed by chaplains and sanctified with oils mixed from the blood of heroes, making each blade a relic worthy of veneration. When battle comes, they are unleashed like prayers given flesh. They fight without fear because they have already died. They charge into impossible odds because they remember being Sanguinius, remember choosing death over surrender. Enemy fire cannot stop them. They have experienced worse on the bridge of the vengeful spirit. Pain means nothing to warriors who carry the memory of broken wings and pierced hearts. Their tactics defy conventional military doctrine. They seek the enemy's strongest points, the most dangerous opponents, the positions where death is most certain. Not from suicidal impulse, but from genetic imperative. They are drawn to moments where their death might matter, where their sacrifice could echo their Primarch's choice to die for something greater than themselves. The other blood angels watch them with mixture of grief and pride. Today's Death Company includes brothers they served beside for centuries, warriors whose names they carved into their memory alongside battle honors and share victories. Tomorrow, any of them might join those black ranks, might wake in sanctified cages to whisper prayers in voices that are no longer their own. This is why the Death Company fights, not for victory. That luxury belongs to warriors who still believe in their own survival. They fight to transform meaningless death into meaningful sacrifice, to ensure that when they finally fall, their ending serves the same purpose as their Primarch's, to prove that even madness, properly directed, can serve hope. When the last enemy falls and battle ends, surviving members of the Death Company are returned to their chambers. Some die of wounds that would barely slow normal space marines. Others linger, their enhanced physiology keeping them alive in bodies that no longer remember why living matters. A few, the blessed few, wake from their visions to find themselves alive in a world they barely recognize. But all of them, living or dead, sane or mad, serve the same function. They are proof that love can survive death, that sacrifice can transcend time, that even the broken can serve sacred purposes. They are the death company, and they have already died for you. 1,500 years, 15 centuries of war, of watching brothers fall, of bearing burdens that would crush lesser souls like insects beneath an emperor-class titan's tread. Commander Dante stands on the walls of Baal, his ancient armor scarred by conflicts that have become legends, his face hidden behind the golden death mask that has become more real than the features beneath. He is tired, not the fatigue of a single campaign or even a difficult century, but the soul-deep exhaustion of a man who has lived too long in a galaxy that devours hope. He should be dead, by every metric that applies to space marine physiology, by every precedent set by his predecessors, by the simple mathematics of combat and time. Dante should have fallen centuries ago. Chapter masters rarely survive beyond 300 or 400 years of active service. The demands of leadership, the stress of constant warfare, the accumulated damage of superhuman existence, all conspire to claim even the most legendary warriors within mortal time frames. But Dante endures. He persists not through luck or superior skill, but through sheer stubborn refusal to abandon his post while his chapter needs him. He has become less a man than an institution, a living embodiment of blood angel resilience that inspires even as it disturbs those who understand what his longevity truly costs. The weight shows in everything he does. Watch him review casualty reports, how his fingers pause over names of warriors he personally recruited, trained, watch grow from neophytes into heroes. Read the slow precision of his movements, economy of motion that speaks to joints that have absorbed more punishment than ceramite should be able to bear. Listen to the silence that follows his rare smiles, the pause that suggests he is remembering something or someone that no longer exists. His greatest trial came during the devastation of Baal, when High Fleet Leviathan descended upon their homeworld like a living nightmare. For the first time in 15 centuries, Dante faced the possibility of total defeat. Not just his own death, he had made peace with that long ago, but the extinction of everything he had spent his life protecting. The Blood Angels, their successor chapters, the very world that had given birth to Sanguinius himself. The battle should have been their end. Tyranid bioships blotted out the stars, their numbers beyond counting or comprehension. The hive mind itself seemed focused specifically on Baal, as if recognizing the symbolic importance of destroying the angels' sons on their own soil. Dante stood in the command center of the Arx Angelicum, surrounded by strategic displays that showed nothing but approaching death, and for the first time in his long existence, felt despair settling into his bones like winter cold. But despair, for Dante, has always been a luxury he cannot afford. When hope fails, duty remains. When duty falters, spite endures. He had not survived 15 centuries by accepting defeat gracefully. He marshaled every asset at his disposal, not just the Blood Angels, but representatives from dozens of successor chapters who had answered the call to defend their Primarch's homeworld. The fighting lasted for months. Brother turned against brother, as the Red Thirst and Black Rage claimed warriors by the hundreds, transforming defenders into berserkers who cared nothing for tactics or strategy. Dante watched his carefully laid plans crumble as genetic curses proved more reliable than military discipline. Yet still he fought, still he commanded, still he refused to yield, even as the walls of the Arx Angelicum began to crack under bioweapon bombardment. Then came the miracle that saved them all. High Fleet Leviathan simply stopped. The bio ships that had been pressing their attack with mindless determination suddenly withdrew, abandoning a victory that had been within their grasp. The hive mind that had orchestrated their assault with perfect coordination fell silent, leaving scattered Tyranid organisms to fight and die without central direction. To this day, no one knows why. Imperial analysts suggest massive casualties inflicted by the Blood Angel's desperate defense damaged the hive mind beyond its ability to function. Some whisper of darker possibilities, that forces older and more terrible than Tyranids intervened to preserve Baal for their own purposes. Dante himself offers no theories, but those who know him best recognize the weight that settled on his shoulders after the victory. Because victory it was, but at a cost that even his long experience could barely comprehend. Entire chapters have been reduced to a handful of survivors. The surface of Baal itself lay scarred and poisoned, transformed from a radiation-blasted wasteland into something actively hostile to human life. Worst of all, the genetic curses that plagued his bloodline had accelerated under the stress of combat, claiming warriors who might have served for centuries more under normal circumstances. In the aftermath, when Robert Guilliman himself arrived to survey the damage, Dante knelt before the returned Primarch and spoke words that shocked everyone present. He asked to be relieved of duty, not from cowardice or defeat, but from the simple recognition that 15 centuries of service had finally exceeded even his capacity to bear. Guilliman's response revealed the true measure of Dante's worth. The Primarch did not grant his request. Instead, he named Dante regent of the Imperium Nihilus, placing half of the galaxy under his authority, not because the Blood Angels needed the honor, but because the Imperium needed Dante's experience, his perspective, his refusal to surrender, even when surrender would be easier than endurance. Dante accepted the burden because accepting burdens is what he does. He has become the embodiment of his chapter's fundamental truth, that duty transcends desire, that purpose outlasts hope, that sometimes the greatest service is simply refusing to die when death would be convenient. He stands on the walls of Baal, ancient beyond measure, but unbroken, watching the stars with eyes that have seen the worst the galaxy can offer and still found reasons to continue fighting. He is tired. He is alone in ways that only immortals can understand. But he endures because someone must, because his chapter needs him, because the Imperium requires leaders who understand that hope is not a feeling, but a choice made new each day despite evidence that suggests despair would be more rational. Dante refuses to die because dying would be selfish. And after 15 centuries of service, selfishness is a luxury he still cannot afford. The sky bleeds, not metaphorically, not in the poetic language that warriors use to describe terrible beauty, but literally. Bioacids rain from Tyranid ships overhead, each drop carrying genetic material designed to dissolve flesh, metal, hope itself. Baal dies beneath an alien heaven that rides with purpose, and every blood angel who draws breath knows they are witnessing the end of everything they have ever fought to protect. Hive Fleet Leviathan arrives like a plague given form. Bioships beyond counting blot out the twin suns, their hulls pulsing with organs that serve purposes human science cannot fathom. The hive mind speaks in frequencies that bypass hearing entirely, whispering directly into the genetic memory of every living thing on Baal's surface. Submit. Feed. Become part of something greater than your individual existence. The Blood Angels refuse. They have heard such whispers before, not from aliens, but from their own cursed blood. They know the difference between unity and consumption, between transcendence and dissolution. When the first wave of Tyranid organisms crashes against the walls of the Arx Angelicum, they meet warriors who understand hunger intimately and have learned to make it serve sacred purposes. But understanding and victory are different things entirely. For every gaunt that falls to bolter fire, 10 more surge forward. For every larger bioform brought down by concentrated fire, the hive mind adapts, learns, develops countermeasures that render previous tactics obsolete. The Blood Angels fight with skill accumulated over 10 millennia, but their enemies learn from every mistake in real time. Worse still, the stress of constant combat accelerates the genetic curses that define their nature. Warriors fall to the Black Rage by the hundreds, transforming from disciplined soldiers into berserkers who attack friend and foe alike. The Red Thirst claims others, driving them to feast on alien ichor that provides no satisfaction, only deeper hunger. Then the miracle occurs. Without warning, without explanation, the Hive fleet simply stops. Bioships that have been pressing their attack with implacable determination suddenly withdraw, abandoning certain victory for reasons the Hive mind keeps to itself. The sky clears, the rain of acid ceases, and Baal survives, scarred, poisoned, forever changed, but alive. Some victories raise more questions than they answer. The devastation of Baal saved the Blood Angels, but it also revealed how close they had come to extinction, how fragile their existence truly was, how much they depended on forces beyond their understanding for their continued survival. The scars remain visible on Baal's surface, reminders that even angels can bleed, even hope can falter, even the most perfect warriors can find themselves face to face with endings they cannot prevent through skill or courage. 10,000 years, 10 millennia of beautiful suffering, of curses worn like honors, of warriors who drink blood and call it sacrament. The Blood Angels stand at the edge of time itself, balanced between transcendence and destruction, asking the same question that has haunted them since Sanguinius first spread his wings above the sands of Baal. Are they angels? Or are they monsters who have simply learned to serve noble purposes? The answer matters less than the asking. In a galaxy where most choose between order and chaos, light and darkness, the Blood Angels have found a third path. They embrace their flaws as gifts, transform their curses into purpose, make their sufferings serve hope itself. They know what they are: predators who hunt in service of those they could easily devour. Warriors whose greatest victories come when they choose restraint over indulgence, protection over consumption. Angels who have looked into the abyss of their own nature and learned to make it sing hymns of devotion. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps redemption is not about becoming perfect, but about choosing perfection even when your nature suggests otherwise. Perhaps damnation is not about being flawed, but about letting those flaws define you instead of serving something greater. The Blood Angels will endure because they understand the difference. They carry the death of their Primarch in their blood, but they also carry his choice to die for others. They inherit trauma, but they also inherit love. They are cursed, but they are also blessed with the knowledge that even angels can fall and still choose to rise again. In the end, they are exactly what the galaxy needs them to be: beautiful monsters who remember what beauty means. Perfect warriors who understand that perfection requires constant choice. Angels who prove that even the damned can serve sacred purposes. This is their legacy. This is their gift to humanity. This is why the Blood Angels matter. Not because they are perfect, but because they choose to be.